Hello, this is John Rankin, and this is episode 1 in a brand new series called the BibleandPolitics.org. And the .org is added there since you can go to the web page that describes it. I am a native of West Hartford, a resident of Simsbury. I head up the Theological Education Institute, TEII.org, where for decades what I've done is taught political theology or theology and politics at the grassroots of the church, hosted many forums on college and university campuses. And the motto of the TEI is the power to love hard questions. And what we're doing in this series is we're going to be looking at any questions surrounding the place and nature of the Bible in politics. And there are 2 basic tracks, and we'll be doing the first episode on track 1 today. Track 1 focuses on politics. And in particular, and you can see in front of you our visual display for the day. You can see all the volumes of Connecticut statutory law as of 2006. That's my volume that I own. And in 2006, all the pages, including the footnotes, equal 17,000 pages. And what I did in my 2007 book, The 6 Pillars of Honest Politics, was I took these 17,000 pages and reduced it down to 36 pages. And so you can make the contrast between the two, 36 pages or 17,000 pages. Now, I believe that whatever is simple is the truest and the most transparent, and that's what we want in honest law. And so what we're doing in track 1 is we're going to walk through my proposal with my colleagues whom I'll introduce, and they'll introduce themselves momentarily. And so what happens is that we're going to walk through this in conversational fashion without any rush to see if my proposal of cutting law from 17,000 pages to 36 is actually doable, or is it somewhat crazy in terms of my hope. But we in Connecticut are facing a crisis with our budget out of control, the debts way beyond our ability to repay them. And so this is my introduction to my ideas of how to go about it, and that is what we're doing in this series, the BibleandPolitics.org. Then once we're done with this, however long it takes, I want to walk through something called The Law by Frederick Bastiat, mid-19th century in France. It's one of the most simple and beautiful descriptions of economic sanity I think there is, again, to contribute to the well-being of our political culture here in Connecticut. And then the second track that we do, and we'll run these roughly parallel, I'll bring in a range of guests from every theological and political view you can imagine to discuss a whole range of issues where the Bible and politics interface. So that's our introduction to start, and I'd like each of my 3 guests to introduce themselves. These are friends and colleagues who have also promised to rake me over the coals with their toughest questions as we look at this proposal. So let's begin, Josh, with you.
Hi, my name is Joshua Plourde, and I spent 8 years in the service, the United States Air Force 4 active, and graduated from Charter Oak State College, a non-traditional student. I am an ordained minister at Riverbank Christian Church and currently work in the behavioral health field, as well as being married and a father of 4, which is most important.
All right. My name is Matt Kinnaman, and John, I wanted to say thank you for putting this together. The topic is really intriguing to me, the Bible and politics, mostly because I've been interested in politics my whole life, and maybe the pertinence of being on the program here, as you know, John, is I was a candidate for U.S. Congress in 2002 in the 1st District in Massachusetts, and I didn't win, so I tried again in 2006, ran for state senate in Massachusetts with the same result, and learned some things about Massachusetts politics during that time, and maybe we'll get into some of that. And I also served on the Massachusetts Republican State Committee from 2004 until 2010, and had the opportunity to chair the Platform Committee in 2010 when now Governor Baker was first nominated to run for governor. I currently work in private business. I did spend about 20 years in Christian ministry leadership positions, and I have my bachelor's degree in philosophy and political science, and my master's degree in political science from the University of Rhode Island. And glad to be here. Thanks.
I'm Mark Anderson. I live in Granby. I retired a couple years ago from the Army, and then with some help from the GI Bill, I got a master's in public policy from Liberty University, and I used some of the spare time on my hands of retirement to found a nationally chartered conservative group in Connecticut, the Connecticut Republican Assembly. And I recently spent the last several months as the campaign manager for a local state representative who won re-election. Politics are my passion, and how to reconcile that with biblical truth is the dilemma.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. And we'll get into my proposal here shortly. I'll add a little bit more on my own perspective. So I grew up voting, but not trusting politics very much. And when I was in my first seminary degree, so I did theological degrees at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, North Shore of Boston, and then a degree in ethics and public policy at Harvard Divinity School. And now in my advancing years, I'm doing a PhD at the Oxford Center for Mission Studies in England on Hebrew covenant and freedom, particularly political freedom. So we all have an interest in biblical theology. We all have an interest in political honesty, political health. And I will argue that the biggest issue is that of freedom. And so if you were to ask me what my politics are, I seek to be biblical, and I'm a pro-life libertarian. So we all have various labels, and labels have strengths and weaknesses. But the presupposition here is that all of us that are being watched on television, we have similar frameworks as Christians. But to be a Christian and to be one rooted in Hebrew covenant, back to Genesis, which I teach on thoroughly, we love hard questions. We want to have people who disagree with us. And so anyone watching this, if you want to join the show with us, just contact me. Go to thebibleandpolitics.org, and you will see the contact information. And in track 2, I'm lining up various guests as well. But two of my colleagues here so far have promised to rake me over the coals as we go through this. So our desire is to have good conversation among friends. And also the fact is that anyone who seeks to love God and love neighbor as themselves regards every human being as a friend. And they may prove otherwise, but that's the nature of the gospel, is to love our neighbors as ourselves. So let me begin here, and Josh, I'll pick on you first. So in my book, the one chapter, this second to last chapter, is the Constitution and General Laws of the State of Connecticut, my proposed revision as of 2006 and following. And so the preamble is where we begin. And so, Josh, if you would read the first 4 sentences of what is there, and then we can begin our conversation.
We, the people of Connecticut, in order to establish a just, peaceful, and prosperous state, establish this Constitution and general laws. We make 6 assumptions that serve the consent of the governed, and thus an honest political state. First, the inalienable rights of life, liberty, property, given by the Creator, belong to all people equally, and leaders in state government honor such rights. Second, leaders in state government are to be fully transparent in all manners related to the public trust.
So those are the first 4 sentences. Let's just look at the first one. And what I did in writing this was I sought to honor the construction of the state laws as we have right now, our particular history. And in the preamble is where I'm introducing some of my ideas. And it comes from the 6 Pillars of Honest Politics, which comes from a prior book, The 6 Pillars of Biblical Power. And this is language I've used over the years for loving God, loving neighbor. I've spoken on, 150, 200 different college campuses, all the Ivy Leagues, well beyond, and in a whole range of churches. And I find this language is accepted by everyone and honored, except for one word, and that's the word creator among my atheistic friends. And so they will say they don't like the word creator, and I will say, okay, well, that's when we get down there a little bit further. But so the first sentence is establish a just, peaceful, prosperous state. So any comments or observations at this point? And no dead time is allowed on the air.
There is nothing to disagree with there
Okay.
that I can see.
I agree.
Okay, so what that means is, in rewriting the state constitution laws and reducing it from 17,000 pages to 36, we have one sentence that already is in the can.
Although
4 of us.
maybe not so quick though.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Because really definition of the 3 descriptions there, just, peaceful, and prosperous, immediately becomes a possible point of contention. I remember during the heyday of the Soviet Union's expansion, peace was defined by the Soviet power structure as the presence of Soviet rule. So we had a different idea, a different definition of peace on this side of that contest. Do you think we run into this? So you come into the contentious world of Connecticut politics. We think perhaps with common sense that those three descriptions will be agreed upon, but maybe not. Maybe not.
That's right. And what you're pointing out is the key reality. We have to define our terms. And when we actually get to the third element here, we'll talk about definition of terms.
I jumped the gun.
No, you didn't jump the gun.
Okay.
Because what happens is, one thing that is crucial, and in my understanding of biblical theology and Hebrew theology, is when you start in the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, there are two things that are utterly common, and Jewish people understand that to this day. Now, I'm a Northern European Protestant mutt, okay? But my great aunt figured it out. My sister's DNA just proved it. I've got 3% of Hungarian Jewish blood in me as well. So I like the fact that all my Hebrew scholarship is now means that I am a son of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But what happens is, if you look among Jewish people this day, regardless of different theological understandings, freedom and hard questions are utterly universal. And we're not free unless we can ask hard questions. And when you ask hard questions or any questions, you must be willing to go on the detour. So as we go through this, there are no detours. And so you haven't jumped the gun, but what you've done is you've shown the wisdom of someone who's thinking. And we want to be a thinking people. So yes, what is justice? What is peaceful and what is prosperous? Put all those three together. Is justice, peace, and prosperity done by a top-down government where order is promised but you don't have elbow room? Or if we risk as much freedom as possible, do we run the possibility of disorder? What is the balance between those two? And we need to think that out as we progress. Josh?
Yeah, I would think that there are people that feel that they've not been treated right and that there's been injustice. And so then what is the definition of justice?
Right.
And even in the classes, in different demographics, because there are certain demographics that are going to feel like that maybe that's your justice, but it doesn't hold for us. And then you'll have some challenges there.
Such a charged concept. Justice. Economic justice means, in the minds of many, it means equality of income, equality of result,
Communism.
not equality of opportunity.
Right.
So there's no justice.
Which is the communist
as long as
promise.
somebody at this table makes more money than somebody else at this table, there is no justice.
Right.
But the other side of it is the criminal.
Yep.
Is the justice fair in certain people's eyes over others?
Right.
Where if they've been treated fairly by the law or the courts, they feel like justice is there. If they haven't been treated fairly, they feel like justice isn't there. So it's that term that could cause different people from different demographics to challenge.
Well, this is fun because we reached a premature conclusion on the agreement to the first sentence. Not that we disagree with it, but we're raising what needs to be raised. And that is, what do these terms mean, and how are we e pluribus unum, the many becoming one?
Right.
Okay,
Right.
And that's what our Constitution and laws are based on in this country. And the many becoming one is also the metaphor for the Hebrew nation of the 12 tribes being one but having their own identities. The 13 colonies being one, but being their own identities but being one. Articles of Confederation did not work, and then our Constitution has worked reasonably well since then. And also, for those who are Christian, the body of Christ metaphor. Though we are many, we are one. This is a common pursuit in all of human nature. Now, on the issue of justice, so for example, I've done a lot of work in Islam. And in Islam, there really is a sense that justice precedes freedom. And unless you have justice, you cannot be free. I'm going to argue, unless you're free, you cannot have justice. So we need to explore all these angles. So I would think that everyone wants justice for themselves. Do we want it for our neighbors? They want peace. Now, what is peace? Any definitions of what you think peace is?
Absence of violence.
Okay, now that's fun. Absence of violence. Now, do you know you just gave us a double negative? Okay, it's freedom from something is your definition of peace. And yet the Hebrew definition of peace is shalom. But that's actually not what shalom means before it's translated as peace. It means wholeness and integrity. And that's the body and its people together. When everything is whole and healthy, then you have peace. And so what happens is, and again, you can see this in Islam as well, it is peace, the absence of violence, which is common to all of us from one angle or another, but that just happens to be their particular angle. And then we come on to the idea of prosperity for whom. So we'll leave that right where it is, just peace and prosperity. Is it attainable for all people equally? That's the real question. Mm-hmm. Matt, you're about to.
Well, one of the possible. I mean, one of the realities we accept in free enterprise is an inequality of outcome, mm-hmm. but an equality before the law, an equality of opportunity. So, on prosperity, we in our so I like free enterprise and private property. I believe in private property rights as foundational to freedom. If that,
right.
I can't understand how freedom can exist without private property rights,
right.
including the ultimate private property, my own conscience. Mm-hmm. So that doesn't that leads free enterprise leads to the greatest prosperity for all, but not equal prosperity. I just got hung up on what
you
asked.
Equal.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so what is equality? Equality, biblically, when you come right down to it, man and woman are made in Genesis 1 and 2 as equals and complements. So they're not mirror images of each other. Otherwise, you wouldn't have children. They're equals and they're complements. As you move forward through the Tanakh, you have an understanding that freedom is the basis for equality of humanity. Our humanity is equal. We have the same unalienable rights. Our lives, our liberties, our properties are not to be infringed on by anyone else. So that's the equality, which then yields freedom for us each to become whom we want to become. So there are those for whom what they want to become is very successful in business, make a lot of money and employ others and do good. That's the positive side, okay? Mm-hmm. There's others who want to become an academic. And if you want to become an academic, you're not going to earn as much money as a captain of industry. Both of these people are free, okay? What justice is for opportunity for people to flourish as best they can. Right. And so the question as we walk through this, do we have something that serves that end? So that every person knows that they are respected and they are free to pursue the best of what they want that is ultimately treating other people as equals. Mm-hmm.
So it's really the equal opportunity to pursue something, not necessarily to attain it, but to have the opportunity to everybody to pursue it.
Yes. So Matt just referred to property. Property was John Locke's biggest mm-hmm. issue mm-hmm. in the first two treatises of human government, and many people may be aware of those treatises. Most people know the second treatise, which lays out checks and balances on power, but they don't know the first treatise. And in the first treatise, John Locke is a theologian of excellent stature, well trained in the Hebrew. And he was challenging a work at the time, this is in the 17th century, by Robert Filmer called Patriarcha. And Patriarcha was a work that said, it was arguing for the divine right of kings, and the divine right of kings went back to Adam, he said. And in his argument, he said Adam was the master of Eve. And John Locke says, but the Hebrew says that their authority over creation is to man and woman as equals and complements. So right there, he took apart all of divine right of kings and the false view of Robert Filmer. And so we need to understand, and this is all starting in John Locke's concern for property and the state not taking property away from us. Now, Thomas Jefferson, on the Committee of Five that wrote the language for the Declaration of Independence, including Connecticut's own Roger Sherman, he said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, Jefferson was being a philosopher, because Locke would say life, liberty, and property, as do our 5th and 14th Amendments, okay? So why did he put pursuit of happiness in there? And this comes back to the freedom and equality. If you have life, liberty, and property guaranteed, you can pursue happiness. And that happiness is not licentious, it's holistic. You know, we are part of families and neighborhoods, but you get to pursue what you want to do. And then you're free and you're equal in your humanity and freedom. So we need to bring freedom and equality together. Okay, so let's move on to the second one. We make 6 assumptions that serve the consent of the governed and thus an honest political state. Now, I've written another book called Genesis and the Power of True Assumptions. And what I argue here is that all of us have assumptions, and every worldview has assumptions. So, for example, our mutual friend, George Gilder, up in the Berkshires, he told me years ago about Kurt Gödel, the great German mathematician and Einstein's colleague. And what Gödel argued was that within the mathematical model, you cannot prove, it's a closed system, you cannot prove that 1 + 1 = 2. But if you step outside it and assume it, then everything in mathematical models works. And so if you're an atheist, you assume nothing produces something, or you won't talk about what preceded the hot Big Bang. You know, for myself, I go to Genesis 1 and 2, and I see all the good assumptions. And what is the assumption of all? In the beginning, God. And we have to look at what is greater than space, time, and number. So here's the point. Everything we do is based on certain assumptions. And so what I am trying to do in this rewrite is say, here are 6 good assumptions. And so that's there. So the first one, Mark, if you could just read the first one for us again. First, the unalienable rights.
First, the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and property, given by the Creator, belong to all people equally, and leaders in state government honor such rights.
Okay, so, Josh, since you are the self-appointed devil's advocate, as you told me before we taped this show, what is an objection to this sentence?
What we already had said, referring to the Creator, because then if I don't believe in a Creator, then this doesn't include me.
Right, you don't feel included. Any other thoughts, Matt or Mark?
I know the Declaration of Independence acknowledges the Creator a half dozen times, and the Constitution, at least in its signature block, and the Connecticut original Constitution
Yes.
at least acknowledges the good providence of God. So there is precedent nationally and in the state, but in this state of Connecticut seems very secular or postmodern. So it would be very difficult to get this passed.
So I have done, I host a series of Marshall forums, as you each know, and I've done them with lead skeptics of my theology and politics. So for example, the president of the National Organization for Women at Smith College, Jeremiah Wright, the former pastor to Barack Obama. We had a very good conversation right after Barack Obama was elected in 2008. And so I'm always looking to be accountable to people who think differently, and I've addressed at least 17 forums with atheists, President of American Atheist on outward. And so what is my response to them? Well, one atheist in particular, he said, well, listen, this does not include atheists. I said, well, if you were in Europe with established churches, you were not included. So what happened with this nation being founded by Christians, and of the 56 signatories, they were all Christian, all but one were Protestant. The influence of the Reformation, George Whitfield's preachings, half of them had divinity degrees. And the one Catholic, and there was the only one who signed where he lived, daring the British to come after him, John Carroll of Carrollton, Maryland. But they all assumed the same biblical framework of the Creator giving unalienable rights. Well, what are unalienable rights? You have one of two sources, and Matt, this goes back to your earlier question about the source for justice and peace. Either God gives them or the state gives them. If the state gives them, the state can take them away. And the only Creator, the only God in all of written history that gives us the unalienable rights is Yahweh Elohim in Genesis 1 and 2. Every other God or concept of God does not give it. You end up with a contest of ego battles about rights. So I say to my atheist friends, I say, look, isn't this amazing? You had these 56 signatories and then the Constitutional Convention in 1787. And what they did in that Constitution, checks and balances on power, this goes back to the Reformation, to the Hebrew covenant and so forth, is a constitution was written by Christians, and they did not impose their Christianity on everyone else. Everything in there is for all people equally, and they source it within the Creator. So that is historically easy to show. So the next question is this. Okay, if you don't like the word Creator there, do you have a better source of idea where your life, liberty, and property are protected from being violated by others? And I know of no answer other than yes.
And that's the difficulty I've seen as I've wrestled with the questions around the intersection of faith and politics. There's such a strong current today desiring to remove the presence of faith, or some would call it religion, some would call it more specifically Christian activism in the public arena, to remove those things. They don't have, under the premise that they don't have a rightful place in public life under our contemporary understanding of the separation of church and state. And I listened to that, and as someone who values what you've referred to here, John, as unalienable rights, and what the Declaration of Independence refers to as unalienable rights, the difficulty that I keep running into is exactly what you just pointed out. If there is no unalienable nature to your rights and mine, that is, they were somehow construed and granted by human will, as you said, they can be taken away. So while it sounds good at first to our moment in history in America, it sounds good to a lot of people to get God out. I want to know the answer. Personally, I want to know the answer to this question, and I think collectively as a nation and as a state we need to know the answer. If we get God out, then what guarantees those things we want for ourselves, which we agree are freedom and liberty and equality and opportunity? What guarantees, or who says what we get?
Right.
The strongest won't ultimately to jump to a conclusion. The strongest one will get to decide who gets what.
Might makes right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's where that's where we
are. Mm-hmm. So how do we get here? Any thoughts? Why is it, if we are defining unalienable rights from the Creator honestly, religious, political, economic liberty for all people equally, why would anyone want to contest against that? What is the history that leads us to that point, Matt, or Mark, or Josh?
Leads us to the point of
where we are,
kicking God out?
Yeah, of where we are.
Probably started with Darwin.
So you only want to go back that far?
No,
go ahead.
Go further.
In modern history.
Yeah.
I would maybe the Enlightenment before that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But and then it became probably totally ingrained in our education, probably starting in the 30s.
Okay, so that's
Public education.
That's a historical observation. What about human nature? Where does this start in human nature?
Well, at the beginning.
Right at the fall.
Starts right away.
Okay.
Starts right away,
Okay.
yeah.
But let's say we're founded as a nation on unalienable rights, and that is the consensus for quite a while. That consensus is worn down. Why? This is a leading question, and that's why I'm not a lawyer. Okay. so well, I'll give you my thoughts and get your response. All the atheists I know, I don't think any of them are real atheists. Rather, if you listen to them well, they are criticizing the hypocrisy of the church and overwhelmingly broken childhoods, which can be usually categorized as the chosen absence of the biological father. And so if they don't see a father loving and providing, and they see God the Father, and they see things they don't understand in the Bible, they conflate the two, and they view the Bible as a source for evil. A far larger topic we will look at, or we can jump into it at any time. The question I'd ask there is, what is the definition of good and evil, and what is the source material that any of us have for that? So from my perspective, when I see people, and there are many darn good questions the church has to be accountable for across her years. And so when people are burned by the church, or burned by a fatherhood that wasn't a loving fatherhood, which is so often the case, then they react and they associate their language of Creator or God the Father in that context. If that's the case, or to the extent that it's the case, how do we respond? So my response is listen as well as I can, and then raise the question of really what are we all seeking, okay? And then if we're all seeking it, what is the best source for it?
And another what might be an interesting point. I find myself coming back around to this when I think about these tragedies of the truth being perverted or misused. And so when that happens, when hypocrisy happens, or when painful personal injury happens, because someone in a position of leadership representing God, the truth, Christianity, did wrong things and hurt people, when we throw out the belief system because of that, seems that that's an error. That's logically that's a mistake. What we're upset about is the twisting or the misuse of the truth, not the truth. It's the truth that lets us be upset. This is what I've been wrestling with. It's the truth that lets us be upset about it being misused.
Right.
So if you're a bad pastor,
Yes.
and you run a bad church,
We're not talking about Josh, are we?
no, some guy is a bad pastor and runs a bad church, and so that happens so much.
Yes.
So people hate the church. I get that. But what we're upset about ought to be the bad pastor who did bad things and ran a bad church,
Right.
because it violates what we know shouldn't have been violated.
And so what happens is, you're right, in my understanding, what happens is people can then go from propositional truth, which sounds good, but if they've been burned, they're not going to look at rational arguments necessarily, or the issue of truth. They're going to look at relational brokenness of trust. And so we need to be people not just of the head, but of the heart. We need to be heart, soul, mind, and strength, as Jesus sums up loving God with our whole being. And so with this being the case, and as I think about rewriting the Connecticut Constitution to make it simple and accountable, this language, as we unpack it, proves to be the best language there is. And so when people object to it, my experience, and across nearly 40 years of public policy ministry, is when people are allowed to speak why and what pain they've been through or what their objections are, then it gives them distance to start thinking about what really is true. And I'll give you one example. I was asked to debate at Brown University in 1989, Mary Ann Sorrentino, and she was the past president of Planned Parenthood of Rhode Island. She'd just been excommunicated by the Roman Catholic Church, the bishop in Providence. So they had a packed audience for her to debate in favor of legalized abortion, for me to debate in favor of pro-life. Well, during the Q&A, one woman asked me a question, 7 rows in on my right. I remember this moment so clearly. And so we're going back and forth in Q&A, questions and answers. And she gives the question, what about rape and incest? And all of a sudden, that entire audience was quiet. The 1881 Sales Auditorium, where all the seats with their flip-top tables were bolted to the floor, and you could hear those screws, squeaking all night long, and then all of a sudden it was silent. I gotcha. Or that question is so deep in terms of hell and human pain, visited upon women in particular, that the audience was there waiting for me to answer. So I looked at her and said spontaneously something like this. I said, is it fair for me, I said, I want to ask you a question, it turned into 3. Is it fair for me to assume that you, like me, are seeking the qualities of peace, order, stability, and hope? And she nodded yes. The whole audience nodded yes, and it was quiet. So what I was seeking to do right there was to honor the human suffering underneath the propositional question. That's the nature of the gospel. And as a minister of the gospel, that's my concern. I don't know if I mentioned it ahead of time, but I'm also an ordained minister. So anyhow, then I continued. Is it also fair for me to assume that you, like me, are seeking to live, to love, to laugh, and to learn? The same affirmation, the same quiet. I said then, there's far more that unites us than divides us. So I just have one more question for you. in the face of the hell of rape and incest, and it is hell, does abortion unrape the woman and restore to her those broken qualities, or does it only multiply the fracture or brokenness further? And you could hear a pin drop. So what happens is, when people have suffered violation or pain from 1,000 angles, you just can't simply say, no, I disagree with you. We need to understand why people have pain, make sure they're listened to, and then we can think forward on the best possible answer. And so that's what we want to do. And so I will then argue that the language of the Creator, and I will defend and define who the Creator is in Genesis 1 and 2, is good. And then this is my freedom, and this is part of the power to love hard questions. I will say to my atheist friends, do you have a better idea, for this common humanity to be affirmed?
I think that with the political realm that we're in, they would look for it as an opportunity to concede some things and take out some other things. And one of the challenges, which you're both are talking about, is that they're not looking at it. Even in the church, it's very political. Mm-hmm. And so they create this political structure where it's this man or woman that's the head, and people's faith is through them. And so if something happens to them and they fall, so an atheist sees that and they see how we treat that. We elevate people when the intent of Christ is not that way. We all should have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, and we all fall short of the glory of God, but for Him. And I think that that's the challenge, is to get man out of the way and the failures of man out of the way, to show them this. But I do think that I think that people on the other side would want to rewrite it to take that out of there, so they have control.
Or they have reactionary control because of pain and suffering. And I think one really honest question we can always ask ourselves, and it came back to this whole issue of peace, whether we are looking for peace as the absence of violence, Mark, as you brought up. We all want absence of violence, okay? But if we are absent someone else's violence who wants to be absent our violence, then you get reaction against reaction against reaction. We all drown in the same miserable soup. So the question is there a proactive that has no negative whatsoever? When we get to the third one here, I'll give you my proactive as we progress. But Josh, you also said something really interesting. When people elevate human authority, it could be the church or elsewhere, that is a classic definition of idolatry. If you ever put someone up to the level of requiring perfection of them, you will be disappointed. And idolatry can take something good, such as a pastor, a father, a mother figure, whatever. You make an idol out of it, as opposed to worshiping God who gave us a good life, then we run into trouble. Mark?
Is your intent with this Constitution a way to point people to what's true, or do you think there's a practical chance that the Constitution could be changed like this?
I do. Now, my father, I need to tell you, told me 6.5 decades ago, or he realized 6.5 decades ago, right after I was born, that I was a tunnel view optimist, okay? And so I acknowledge that, okay? But also, I have a touchstone in reality. The only way this can happen is if we get conversation going and everyone is welcome at the table. So what we're doing here in a very modest way, in episode 1 of the BibleandPolitics.org, is we're trying to start this conversation. So we're doing it among colleagues, but we want to bring in everyone, as I've done on my Marsal forums over the years. I want to be in the presence of those who have the deepest objections to what I believe. Go ahead.
Regarding the creator phrase, at a recent National Convention of Political Party, God was booed. And that party dominates the state. So, would a majority of Connecticut residents vote for the creator?
Well, what happens is, how do they understand the creator? And one theme I've touched on, I will always touch on, okay? And that is, do people see Christ through us? Do they see who he really is? Do they see the creator for who he is through us? And I think as so many people are burned, and also, we have lost, the whole country was based on biblical literacy and on the liberal arts. And how much have we lost that? How much has become touchy-feely and used for manipulation? What is the status of our educational system? And so my interest is not to sort of point out what is wrong. I can raise that question, but rather say, what can we do that is right, okay? What I have found, and I have been face to face with hundreds of thousands of people over the years in various public events, small churches, large university settings, which is really not a lot of people when you add up 38 years of doing this, okay? But with 100 at a time, or occasionally 1,000 more at a time, and talk with a lot of people face to face afterwards. My postgraduate degree at Harvard was in feminist ethics, studying among a bunch of lesbian scholars, and so they couldn't believe that I was a gentleman. Why? Because whatever their politics or theology or identity is, they are, in this case, women made in the image of God. They deserve respect. So this is how we have to conduct ourselves, and it has to become infectious. So I try to do this as much as I can in all my experiences. So let's come back to the definition of good and evil. I'll give you a simple definition that I have. Good humanizes and evil dehumanizes. And you don't know how to define that unless you have a theology and an anthropology, the nature of God, nature of man and woman. But anything I do, so for example, many of the forums I've been in, my goal is not to win a debate or win conversion. God's in charge of that, okay? My goal is to increase communication. And so if I humanize, so in all but maybe 2 or 3 instances over these years, my interlocutor, the person whom I'm either having a conversation with or debating, I could say tangibly, as we walked out, they felt more human as a result, that I honored their humanity, and they received it. And only 2 or 3 cases did I see the reaction. And the Bible does talk about that. People have so hardened their hearts. Why? Because of the pile-on of human pain. And some of us can have the same pain and we move in one direction or another. That's part of the mystery of our free will. So Josh, so what I'm not worried about is the proposition of creator, and a lot of people boo it. Why do they do it? And for we who are Christians, how do we conduct ourselves in such a way that we can talk about it? Because to boo the giver of life, I think doesn't make good sense, in terms of our lives in the long run.
So going back to what Mark said, how is this done? The practicality of it is very important, and how it's packaged. And I really think it comes from who's delivering the message.
Right.
Why, the perspective that they're coming from. Mm-hmm. It's really a heart thing. And if it comes out of an ideologue, you're going to have one side or the other, and it's just a battle of the sides. But if it comes from a group of people that are from different backgrounds, it makes a big difference because I think that you're right about, I don't know if you're totally right about God, because I think a lot of people believe in God, but it's where is it coming from? The definition of God to them. I mean, we have Hindus, Buddhists, Christians, Muslims. And so when you say the Christian God, it changes it. But when we're just talking about God, the creator, you can bring a lot of people into that conversation, even if we have a definition of what that means.
And also part of what I hope to do in the show is some interfaith dialogue. And I'm already lining up some of that with people from different theological, religious backgrounds. You see, if the declaration of the good creator in Genesis 1 and 2 is true, it means we're all made in God's image. We all have infinite value. We all grow up in different contexts apart from any choices of our own. And we are loved equally. And therefore, someone who's a committed Hebrew or Christian in terms of their embrace of the Bible, then we're hospitable, okay? Because we want to find that place of interface with humanity. And that's what an honest government is all about. And that's what our Declaration of Independence did. And that's what the checks and balances have done. So there is no state religion. That's the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law regarding an establishment of religion. And what did that mean? No state church that forces you to pay taxes to be part of society. Let each religious perspective or atheistic perspective, which is what the 1961 and 65 Torcaso and Seeger decisions said, an atheist is religious, not because he's religious, but for the sake he has religious liberty, which means the liberty not to be religious, okay? And this, I argue all of this is in the presence of Genesis 1 and 2. And so I will teach the theology to those who want to, and this is getting back to both questions here, to those who want to hear it. But in terms of our political enterprise, I believe that religious, political, economic liberty prospers everyone equally, and it prospers the gospel the best, and the gospel serves it. And so that's what we're aiming for. So we want, again, it's love our neighbor as ourselves. Treat others, the golden rule, as you yourself wish to be treated. So Josh, as you said, if we are a community of people who do that among ourselves and do that with others, receiving hard questions, receiving disagreement, and then walking through it graciously, lovingly, that's what our politics does not have. We are at war in this country right now. And the war is manipulated, not by the grassroots, but it's manipulated by elitists.
So what do you think of the tone of what the media and much of the culture refers to as the religious right is, that tone? What is that tone in the public space? Because you just described something that's really attractive to, I would think, to really attractive to just about anybody on the spectrum of political belief or religious belief. And that is an openness to listen and to learn and to ask questions and respond to hard questions
without compromising your partisan belief.
So you can do that. Yeah. You can do that, and people don't know how to do that. And I'll be the first to raise my hand. So we, when we get polemical in politics, so when I was in politics, I probably was pretty polemical, thinking it would win an argument. Hasn't the religious right become really strongly branded that way by choice many times? To be polemical for the point of making a point and thinking it can win an argument. And then having been in that, and I got it, I understood why, but I'm listening to what you're saying, and my first question is, man, did we, are they still totally missing the target? By being polemical?
Darn good
with biblical,
darn good question. And note that the religious right is a political term. Right and left, they both have their baggage. Conservative and liberal, they both have their baggage. Okay, Republican and Democrat, they both have their baggage. Yeah. Now, I like the word conservative and I like the word liberal. Okay? Yep. To conserve what is good and be generous with what you've conserved, okay? But what happens is people go to various, it's the meta-ethics of language. It's not what we understand, what we mean by what we say. I hope we do, okay? But what do our listeners understand, and what do those people who disagree with us? Therefore, those who define the terms honestly are the ones who are going to make the best positive contribution to the well-being of church, society, on outward. So back to religious right. So when I first started pro-life work in 1983, I was immediately aware of this problem. And so the way my politics eventually came to be defined was pro-life libertarian, because I can argue that's the nature of Genesis 1 and 2, and life, liberty, property, pursuit of happiness in the Declaration and in the 5th and 14th Amendments. And so I can define and defend each of those with integrity. Once you get into sub-biblical language, or language that's only political, you run into it. The next question is, how much of the religious right was reactive to being disincluded in the 1970s? It was. It was a reaction. Do we react, or are we proactive? And so one thing we will do, what I've sought to do here, it's fair to react if something is unjust or injures us. But do we have a proactive basis to govern our reaction? And then that's what Jesus talks about in terms of loving our enemies.
A proactive basis to govern our reaction.
Yes.
What do you mean?
Very good. Everything in Genesis 1 is it is good, 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 good. We'll talk about this on our next show, because I don't think we'll get to it right now on the fourth element right here. But every definition of freedom in history is freedom from violation. The only positive definition in all of human history is in Genesis 2. This is my PhD work, by the way, okay? And the Hebrew text is so crucial here. Freedom is the power to do the good. If we do the evil, we become slaves to it. So that's why loving God, loving neighbor. And it is so easy to react when we're violated. So to react to putting your hand on a hot stove, I remember doing this as a 7-year-old, and I'll never forget it. The red wasn't on, from these old electrical stoves, and I ran around the kitchen room, put my hand on it, and I had these 2 beautiful lines on my hand, I reacted, ow, Well, reaction's fine, we all do it, but what is the proactive basis? So if someone has abused us or broken our trust, how do we respond? And that's the power of forgiveness. So Yahweh Elohim's power all the way in Genesis 1 and 2 is to give, to give, to give. When people take from us, what does Jesus do? He teaches us to forgive as he's forgiven. So to me, all the proactive is located in Genesis 1 and 2, and I just gave you one definition of that. But here's the point. None of us are perfect. None of us are free from sin and foibles and follies. And I know that as I get older, okay, how many they pile up. But if we make ourselves accountable, if we have checks and balances, which is the whole structure of our federal constitution and the state constitution as originally written, it's not that way anymore. You go through all these 17 volumes, okay? You will see exception clause after exception clause after exception clause with very hard language to read that basically allows people to carve out their own special privilege over and against other people. And that's what law does as it metastasizes, as it grows out of control.
Right. Yeah.
And so we have one of two choices in life. Give and it shall be given, or take before you are taken. And so in the face of those two choices, which one do we exercise? So that's just a small slice, but I will say all the way through the Bible and all the way through my attempt at this rewriting, that's what I'm aiming for.
I think the thing that would work the best to push or to present this plan, the Constitution, and changing it and doing those types of things is all the time in government. Government comes in and says, we know how to fix this. And they go to an inner city and they say, we can fix it. And it's the few dictating to the many.
Right.
Instead of going in there and they say it didn't work, they didn't even talk to us. They don't even know what's going on the ground. Talking to ministers, talking to local community people that actually know what really works and getting their input into how to fix it. And I think that's how things like this get changed from the ground, and not from the top down, but from the ground up.
Now, interestingly, James Davidson Hunter, an evangelical Christian sociologist at the University of Virginia, wrote a book, tongue-in-cheek, about 7-8 years ago called To Change the World. And all the people who want to change the world, okay? And he said you cannot change the world except through institutions, which is the opposite of a lot of grassroots instincts. Now, this is a dynamic conversation, and I think both are true. You have to have those who are in institutions who are grassroots in their identity, and that is what misses in most cases. Every culture, every history in every culture or tribe or nation in world history, and maybe a few small exceptions. But you're going to find that 1 or 2% want to rule over everybody else. They need a civil service and a military. So you might have 8 or 10% of people who are aggregating power and wealth to themselves. This was, on average, really everything up until the Reformation, okay? And it began to change a little bit from that point on forward. And yet Jesus, for example, when he came into Jerusalem on the Sunday, first day of the business week of Passover week, he didn't come in on a war stallion and a cohort of soldiers with trumpets pushing the common people out of the way as Herod would. He came in on the foal of a donkey so young it could not ride without its mother. He was a man among the people, and yet he was coming as King of Kings. So this is where the whole biblical model is so crucial. And so if people want to object to the language of creator or to our position, or they will use religious right language, we want our language to be language that cannot be confused. Okay, and we want always to be cross-examined.
So there may be another objection to your mission, to bring the state constitution and the laws down to 36 pages in the laws,
36 pages as I printed them.
And the Constitution.
Yeah. Yep.
Right here.
Yep.
And that is the objection. Could be a lot of people in politics see this pile of books as a measure of success.
Yeah. So these are my 36 pages.
Yeah.
On top of it all.
There are a bunch of people in Connecticut and in Massachusetts and across the country who would think a pile of books twice this big would be an indication of more success in government,
Right.
not less. So what you want to do is disenfranchise. So you know where I'm going. Don't you have that problem too?
Oh,
but people don't think we have a problem when they see this pile of books.
You know something? There's a lot of people whose existence is defined by that, and that's what you're saying. By the same token, it wears out the soul, it wears out the body. If you're always grabbing for your little piece of the action and taking from someone else, which is really what the whole system has become. And most legislators, I think, when they run for office, they want to do good. Then the system can swallow them up, okay? You get to D.C., and you're a new member of Congress, and vote the party line, and you're not allowed to think or be creative. So the only way this will happen is by a grassroots but also enfranchising every legislator, all the way up to the governor in the state, and say, would you join us in this conversation? See, the key of what I have here is not an idea winning an argument, but it's the quality of relationship in the face of what are the best ideas. And so, yes, but by the same token, you'll get a lot of people saying, boy, I wish the tax code were simple.
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
And so the question is, can we demonstrate the simplicity? Many people can go into academia desiring to come out of it and learn much and do well with it, and they get lost in the labyrinth. You can get lost in the labyrinth of the laws here. Can you start with simplicity, come back with simplicity? And simplicity is not being simplistic. Right. You know, as I say, two choices in life: given shall be given, or take before you're taken. Or two choices in life: trust or distrust. So if we really believe that, if this is a biblical worldview, and we are Christians who want to be positive contributors to the well-being of all society, we need to do this thinking. And so what we're doing in this modest TV show here, the BibleandPolitics.org, as we start, is we're starting the conversation. And we ourselves are saying, yes, we want this conversation. We want everyone who's interested to join us in this conversation. Well, we're moving toward the conclusion here. Any final thoughts? We did get through the first one. We didn't get through all that Josh read. Okay. Mark, any final quick thoughts before we wrap it up?
You did say you meant this something as practical, and I've seen how stubborn politics are in this state. So I'm an optimist and have not given up on shining a light in the government here, but I think I have not figured out the path, so I'm eager to see where we go with this.
Good. And we don't want to drive a parked car, so at least we're starting to go. Matt, any final thoughts in about 15 or 20 seconds?
Well, I'd love to see this conversation expand across not only Connecticut,
yes,
but beyond, because it does come to a question everyone can
You know,
see
I've
as
also
important.
done this with the federal law. I took 48,000 pages and condensed it down to 24.
Well, that's expanding it. Okay,
So that's
good.
condensing it.
That's good.
So,
I mean, that's expanding the argument, the conversation.
So yes, we want to do that. And so what we're really hoping to accomplish here is starting the conversation in our own local.
Yeah.
You're from Massachusetts. You're joining us. So it's not just Connecticut. Final 10 seconds.
I think a lot of people would be interested in this if they felt like it could work.
Yep.
I think people have been pushed down for so long,
Yep.
they just don't see the opportunity of it actually working. So if they felt like it could work and
Yep.
there's good information behind it, then they would get on the bandwagon.
And therefore, the onus or the burden is on me with this proposal, okay? And the best way to see if it works is to talk among fellow people who work and can judge whether or not it works. Anyhow, 15 seconds. Thank you so much for joining us on this, the episode 1 of the BibleandPolitics.org. Go to that website. You have all contact information. We look forward to your input and joining us as you're able. Thank you so much, and gentlemen, and God bless.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.